Ladies and gentlemen, it's the Big Jiu-Jitsu Show. I'm Rob,
I'm Randy.
and we have another guest for you today. We have all the way from England right now joining us via the magic of the internet. We have Dave Allanson. So, Dave, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So, before we get into it, Dave, why don't you give everybody your background, kind of how you started with martial arts, and what you're kind of doing now?
Okay, I started way back in 2010, I think it was. A friend of mine got really into MMA. Um, yeah, the most unlikely guy you'd ever expect to have started doing MMA, and he dragged me down for a few sessions because he didn't want to go by himself, and I got my ass handed to me by a 60. I don't know, I think it was a 56 kilo vegan purple belt, and I was about 100 kilos, having played prop in rugby, and was like, "Oh, there's something to this. This is awesome." Did it for a little while over the summer. Realized MMA was not for me. I took enough strikes to go, yeah, no, I'm good, thanks. And then just didn't do it for years. Went back to rugby stupidly, and then found it again after I stopped playing rugby in 2016, I think it was. And then yeah, since then I've just been training as consistently as I can. I got my brown belt last year, I think, but yeah, it was last year. It's 2026 now, yeah. um, and I've just been training in and around Sheffield since then, basically. Like I tried it when I was down south, and then because I was at uni and stuff, and then just continued up here. I did do a little stint in Nottingham, right around the time when Dan Hardy was really big. And like lots of people, I think we trained with Dan Hardy's old striking coach who taught us jiu-jitsu for some reason, which was very kind of him. But yeah, and then I was training to be a teacher, and then when I got into teaching, I was like, I don't have any hours to do anything outside of this. And then years later, came back to it and really enjoyed it from there. And now I'm coaching jiu-jitsu. Like I'm basically like a cover teacher for our gym, and then I coach jiu-jitsu once a week at an MMA gym locally as well. And I also changed career, so I'm no longer a teacher, and I'm a strength and conditioning coach for grapplers.
Oh, that's a bit of a change. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's really awesome. So going into strength and conditioning, I always find that interesting. I find it like you know, like I'm a proponent of it. I should do it more. However, like I think it is a very big piece of the game, especially like injury prevention. But of course, I'll let you go more into that.
Yeah.
So what caused the change from going to teaching to strength and conditioning coach?
So basically, I loved teaching. I loved being in the classroom. All I wanted to do was be a classroom teacher. I didn't want to be like a head of department or a head of the school or anything like that. And there were a whole host of changes to the way that teaching and education worked in the UK. And it became very clear to me that that wasn't going to happen. I was going to be forced into something that I either didn't want to do, or I was going to be forced to justify the amount of money that they were paying me every year. Um, and but I kept complaining. And basically, my wife said to me, you can either quit so that you'd stop complaining about it, or you can just shut up and stop complaining about it. And I was like, oh, I don't think I will shut up. I think I probably better quit. Um, and yeah, just walked away from it there, and then didn't really know what to do for about 6 months. And just sort of feeling sorry for myself and grieving my job and going, what the fuck have I done? And then had a couple of friends say, well, why don't you do this? Because I'd always been interested in strength training. I've been doing it off and on with rugby since about 2006. So I was lucky enough to already be working with William Wayland, who's like the OG of grappling strength and conditioning in the UK, at least. And he was coaching me at the time. And I said, I think I'm going to get a personal training qualification and then do the CSCS after that, so that I've got strength and conditioning coaching. And his first words were, don't do it. And I laughed at him and was like, if that was enough to stop me, I think it would have been a bad choice. And he was like, good. I had to push back and just see if you were going to go, oh, okay, then I won't do it. Yeah. And it was just off the back of a couple of friends suggesting it. And I went with it and absolutely loved it. Because essentially, as far as I'm concerned, apart from like the subject matter being different, coaching is teaching and teaching is coaching. So, yeah, for me, it felt quite natural. It was just, I wasn't teaching kids how to write arguments anymore. I was teaching people how to lift barbells.
Nice. So with strength and conditioning, what's kind of somebody who's never done it before, they're doing grappling, like kind of what's the process of kind of getting somebody into it, I guess, for grappling?
Yeah, so what I find with most grapplers is either they've got a bit of experience and they've done some like basic gym bro stuff. And the problem with that is it's usually too much and they come to me going, I can't, I keep like training and then dropping off and training and then dropping off because I can't manage the level of work that I'm supposed to be doing in the gym, I'm told, compared to staying on the mats and not feeling sore all the time. Or I get people who've literally never done anything. And like the key difference between strength and conditioning and then just like personal training or something along that lines where you get people who say they're a coach but they haven't got any qualifications is a strength and conditioning coach will do a needs analysis of the sport, so they know what the sport requires, and if they're any good they'll also know what the sport gives, and then you write a plan that kind of fills in the gaps as well as seeing the person in front of you and what they're capable of and what they're not capable of and kind of writing a program that suits them. The really good ones will also talk to that person about what's their life like, what space have they got for this. Like the classic one to look for if you're trying to find a decent coach is, does that coach suggest a 6 day or 4 day or 5 day split for jiu-jitsu? If they do, your coach doesn't know what they're talking about, because realistically no one is going to be able to maintain that level of training, especially drug free, alongside a lot of mat volume. It 2, maybe 3 sessions a week is going to be plenty. But essentially, with everyone, I just start them on a very, very simple program with, depending on what they've got access to, usually barbells. I much prefer that over kettlebells and stuff like that because it's just more loadable. But if that's all they've got access to, we can work with that as well. And I get a lot of, from my remote guys, I get a lot of video feedback so that I can see what are they struggling with, what movement patterns come naturally, what ones don't, what cues do they need, and then just slowly build from that kind of minimal viable programming, basically. So we keep it like really limited and just see what works and what doesn't. And we can switch things out if they're not working, and we can add things in as and when we need to. But I'd rather that it was too easy for the first few weeks so that someone can consistently do it and they build the habit, and then we can start to kind of increase the challenge and push things a little bit from there.
Yeah, when you're when you're trying to manage the workload, I mean, I think that's a you keyed in on something big there. And a mistake I made for years is doing too much. Everybody thinks they're not doing enough, when in reality they're probably doing too much when it comes to strength and conditioning and jujitsu at the same time. Um, so when you're in your working sets, let's say, how do you recommend for someone relatively new to strength and conditioning and they're a jiu-jitsu athlete or a hobbyist, trying to get stronger and more fit? How do you recommend that they kind of track their intensity of their output to make sure they're doing enough, but not too much in their working sets?
So especially for people who don't have a lot of experience, if you don't have like 1 rep maxes to work off and stuff like that, I think the easiest way, and even if you do, to be honest, I think the simplest way to begin with is to go with RPE. So rate of perceived exertion, or reps in reserve, because in people will complain about this, but RPE came from distance running. So you would just rate your runs before everyone decided they needed a Garmin to do anything physical. And RPE and reps in reserve, when we're talking about lifting, kind of equate basically. I'm sure people will get really angry with me about that. It's subjective, it's woolly, it doesn't matter. What matters is your experience of it as the individual. So generally, I will say on the big, heavy compound lifts, you want to be working at about RPE 8 at most, so that you've got at least 2 reps in the tank. They might be ugly reps. RPE 8 usually means all of the reps that you do are decent quality. And if they start to get a bit sloppy, you're pushing too hard, because strength and conditioning is not a shortcut. Like people think, oh, we'll do it in 12 weeks. You'll do fuck all in 12 weeks. You're not gonna get strong in 12 weeks. It is a compound interest game. It's not like sports nutrition or sports psychology where you can get these kind of huge changes in very short spaces of time, especially if you've not been doing anything. If you've been doing nothing, you'll notice a massive improvement in terms of how you feel on the mats, but you won't necessarily see your numbers go high particularly quickly. It's more important that you'll hear people talk about consistency over everything else. And it's true. If you can get 2 sessions in a week every single week, and it doesn't matter if those sessions are all perfect, like you might have a week where you hit everything that's suggested. You might have a week where you do one set of everything. You might have a week where you just squat and then you go home. Um, that consistency over time is what will build the robustness that you need to be able to train as often as you want, while also meaning that we don't interfere with the mat training. Because yes, you can go on these really intensive squat cycles. You can train like a power lifter, you can train like an Olympic weightlifter. The problem there is that the problem with like loads of programs that people will find online is generally they're written by Olympic weightlifters, powerlifters, or bodybuilders. And the issue there is that for all three of those, the training is essentially the sport. Bit different with bodybuilding because then there's also the weight manipulation aspect of it and learning how to pose and stuff like that. But the generally the training in the gym is pretty much part of the sport for bodybuilding, but it's also definitely part of the sport for powerlifting and Olympic weightlifting. So when they're saying train 6 days a week, that's because their sport training is also their gym training. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, we only really need about two, maybe 3 sessions of gym time, because otherwise we're going to start really interfering with that mat time. Like you want to be training, especially if you want to compete, like 5, 6 days a week of mat time. And then within that, we fit the strength and conditioning in and around that where we can. So yeah, generally people will find they're doing far too much because they're following programs that aren't designed for grapplers. Whereas it's very easy to use RPE. It'll change over time. Like as you get better at lifting, you'll start to realize RPE 10 is actually probably a lot. You were probably doing RPE 6 when you thought you were doing RPE 8, but it doesn't matter. It's not important that that was the case. Because the consistency was all that you needed. It's much better to lowball it when you've done nothing before. And as you get more experienced, you'll be able to push it. Because maybe if you'd pushed it even harder, maybe the fatigue cost would have been too high or the quality of reps would have been lower. So I hope that answers your question.
No, it's interesting because like you start talking about that. There have been a few times like I have a very like basic program I do where just like stuff I want to work on, and like you said, it is a compound interest type of thing where you have to consistently do it over time. Otherwise, it's not really worth it. Or like
Yeah.
you're not gonna get those big like changes. But a few times before when I started doing it with friends, are like, we lift every day at lunch, and I'm like, well, I also do jujitsu every day after work, and they're like, perfect. And sure enough, like I'm like 3 days after like lifted heavy, and I mean like these guys like they trained as well, but they've been
Yeah.
lifting for so long. It's basically like we like to lift
Yeah.
during lunch, now we want to do jujitsu on top of it. So like they
Yeah.
were okay with it. I was the exact opposite, where I'm like, I do jujitsu constantly. Like I'll lift every once in a while, but they're like, no, we need to do lunch every day. I'm like, okay, we're gonna do lunch every day. I couldn't maintain it for like 2 or 3 weeks. Like I
Yeah.
did 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm like, I cannot. Like I'm feeling it on the mats. Like I actually feel weaker. I feel like I'm so sore I can't do anything. But that's kind of like an interesting thought because in my brain it was just like I'm not able to do it because I am not a good athlete. Like basically like that was kind of like what I was fighting with at that point. Not that I was overtraining. I'm just like these guys can do it. I'm really freaking good at
Yeah.
jujitsu. Why the fuck can't I do it? So that is kind of an interesting like viewpoint with that with the overtraining aspect.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the thing, like you said there, you answered it yourself there. Like they've worked up to that point where they could do that. The other way that you could get them back is you could have said, "Oh, well, I train jiu-jitsu every evening. We're training jiu-jitsu every evening, and we'll see how long before the wheels fell off for them." Because I bet they were like, "No, no, I can't do tonight, man. I will do. I'll do 3 sessions a week of jiu-jitsu." And it's kind of it's the same with anything. Like you start with minimum effective dose because it just means that the cost of what you're doing is not as high. Because when you've never done anything before, I'm going to throw all sorts of buzzwords around here, but when you've never done anything before, it's a novel stimulus. So you get a massive overreaction from the body because essentially your nervous system and all of the systems that it controls within your body go, what the fuck was that? So like the very first time anyone does a heavy trap bar or a heavy back squat or whatever, for about 2 days, you're sore, you're tired, like you sleep like a baby, your body's going, what have you done to me? And then you go and do it the next week and you're like, oh, what was I complaining about? This is easy now. And it's just because That's the repeat bout effect. It's each time you do something, it's no longer a novel stimulus, but also you get less from it each time. Like that initial stimulus is huge. And it's the same for guys when they first do jiu-jitsu. Like you think of all the white belts who turn up and they are just fucked all the time for like 6 months, but partly because they have no idea what's going on and they're death gripping everything. But it's the same process. It just feels different compared to lifting.
Well, yeah, and I can definitely say, like I tell people all the time whenever they start brand new, I got some officers at my agency that got into jiu-jitsu for the first time and they were like, "Oh, we're gonna go 4 days a week. We're gonna go in there all the time." And I'm like, guys, chill out. Like start twice a week max. Like that's the max for
Yeah.
about a month, and then see where you're at after that point. And they were thanking me after the first week because they were like, "I'm so sore. There's no way." And now I've gotten them to where like they're lifting and doing jujitsu, but they're doing 2 days a week jujitsu and they're lifting 3 days, and so there's
Yeah.
a balance, and then hopefully maybe that'll flip at some point where they're doing more jujitsu and maybe a little bit less lifting. And I'm definitely guilty. And I'm putting this out there for anyone listening is like it's not everybody's going to make the mistake of getting caught up in the novelty of a new lifting program, or like I get caught up. I'll say all the time, "Oh, I'm not gonna worry about PRs. Like this is to supplement my jiu-jitsu." And then I start lifting and I'm like, "Oh, I want to crush it. I want to get a bit, and it's just like I can't help it. I love lifting and I love jiu-jitsu. And so I want to get stronger. I want to get faster, and I just enjoy being in the gym and doing hard work. So it's really easy to do too much. And then I'll
Yeah.
feel it on the mats because then I'll go to jiu-jitsu and I'm like, I leave the gym like, what the fuck was that? Why did I suck so bad today? I felt like I was behind. And you're like, you dumbass, it's just because you're doing too much. Like we just got done doing Squattober and then December. It was 5 days a week of back squats programmed, and then it was 5 days during December. It was 5 days a week
Yeah.
of deadlift. And I'm like, what am I doing to myself here? So just a glutton for punishment, and that's a hard thing. It's harder than people think. Once you get
Yeah.
into lifting and it becomes part of your routine, it's actually more difficult than you think to give yourself the right dose and not do too much.
Yeah. And
And
well,
so
that's why I've got a coach because I'm exactly the same. Like I message him every so often with, "Can we do X, Y, and Z?" And he's like, "No, just get on with the program." I'm like, okay, yeah, sorry, that was a stupid idea. Um, yeah, it's really easy to get pulled into it and do stuff that doesn't pay off. Like I've considered doing Squattober and December a few times, and I'm like, I'm not going to manage that alongside everything else that I want to do. Because for me, like I want to do sprints twice, like bike sprints twice a week. I want to do jiu-jitsu 2 to 3 times a week, and I want to lift twice a week. And realistically, I'd love to do all the rest of it, but I either won't or I won't recover from it. And it's just not, there's been a few times where we've pushed just to do a third session a week and the wheels fall off. It doesn't suit me. So it's a slow kind of learning curve, even for coaches. That's why most coaches hire other coaches, partly because it takes the stress off yourself for having to think through your own program and you write it for everyone else. But when you were talking about that, I was like, yeah, it's exactly the same for me. Like I talk to my clients, and they must think I'm the most sensible person in the gym. I'm like, I am a fucking idiot. Like my coach will put RPE 8 and I'm like, yeah, I'll do 5 kilos more than last week because that's how RPE 8 works, isn't it? And I'm like, RPE 9.5, eyes bleeding, going, yeah, this is fine. This is fine. So yeah, it's very easy to do that to yourself. And it's very easy to, the other trap I think people can sometimes fall into is program hopping, because whenever you're on one program, it always looks like everything else is better. And are you guys aware? Like Jim Wendler was really big when I was
Mhm.
first reading into all of this. I remember following 531, and I worked a bit for me, but I probably did it wrong. I was always too close to my actual 1 rep maxes and stuff. But I liked one of the things that he said, which was, don't what was it? Don't forget the girl that brought you to the dance. And his point was, don't forget the programs that actually worked. Don't just jump on the new one because it's the new one. If something got you somewhere and it's still working, keep going with it till it doesn't work anymore. And I think that's quite a helpful principle as well. It's what I try and instill in my guys. Is like, we'll have a bit of variation and you can give me feedback and stuff, but we want to make sure that we're not constantly training, changing programs or changing lifts, or, we want to get very, very proficient at the basics until there's nothing left that we can get out of them. And then we can move to something else and then come back. And um, partly because like jiu-jitsu gets so much movement variability. There's so many different, apart from like sprinting and stuff like that, which we don't get because why would you on the mats? Aside from those kind of human movement patterns, you've got basically everything else. So a lot of training programs involve a lot of variation because if you're training like a power lifter, there's not a lot of movement variability in your program. So you are going to benefit from, oh, well, I'll bring my hands in slightly. Oh, I don't feel like trash anymore. Oh, I'll squat slightly wider. I'll squat slightly narrower. All of those can make a huge difference for you if your sport is very monotonous and very kind of single movement driven. Whereas I think because jiu-jitsu has so much variability, most of the guys just need to get really, really good at hammering the basics in the gym because they don't need the variability. And there's also, because obviously you guys are based in America, generally the people who've played sport in America and have used the gym, your kind of movement and athletic literacy is often much higher than the average person in the UK because PE in the UK is like, try all these different sports. What did you like? There's not really a lot of here's how to use a gym. There's not any kind of space for people to use the gym. I think it might be changing, but at least while I was teaching, there wasn't a lot of that. So it means that a lot of guys who come to jiu-jitsu have done nothing. They are essentially complete ranked beginners. Like they haven't done anything at high school. They didn't do anything at university. They didn't, there's no sort of basic literacy there in terms of what to do. So again, that's why the basic movement patterns can be so useful for a lot of jiu-jitsu guys because many of them come in and I'm like, and guys who are successful as well. And you're like, they're good at their sport, but everything hurts or, they can't squat at all and you have to teach them it. And they can do all of these things on the mats, but then off the mats, they can't. And with them, it's just about building robustness because they've already got the kind of level of performance that they need. It's not necessarily going to be sorry, I'm going on a tangent, but it's like a slight, there's a lot of talk about athleticism in strength and conditioning and people are obsessed with, you've got to be big, strong, fast. Yeah, of course you do. But at the same time, that concept of what it means to be an athlete comes from American football, rugby, soccer, we'd call it football, like over here. To a certain extent, that's kind of newer. But this concept of what it means to be an athlete is heavily influenced by the kind of sports that adopted strength and conditioning early in like the 60s onwards. Whereas if you look at marathon runners, they don't need to be big, strong, and fast because their sport doesn't require that from them. That is a different form of athleticism. Yes, they'll benefit from doing plyometrics, they'll benefit from squatting, they'll benefit from doing those things, but it just looks very different to the kind of program that will produce, I don't know, an NFL linebacker. They're going to be two very different. There'll be similarities, but you put them side by side in terms of the programming, you'd be like, those are not the same. They're not aiming for the same thing. And I think sometimes in jiu-jitsu, people who are well intentioned but not very well educated talk about you need to be explosive, you don't. Jiu-jitsu is fucking slow. It is a slow isometric sport. You don't even need to be as explosive as a wrestler because you could spend your whole time shooting for a takedown and then the other guy just laughs, sprawls on you and chokes you out. Like, it's such an open sport that essentially, if being explosive mattered, then Gordon Ryan wouldn't have been as good as he was. Craig Jones wouldn't have been as good as he was. Like, Nick Rodriguez would be head and shoulders above every other person who's ever done it because he's one of the most athletic people to have done the sport. And don't get me wrong, he's phenomenal. He's up there. But there are guys who beat him who are not necessarily as explosive because it's not a key performance indicator. It doesn't change the game in the same way it does in rugby or American football, where if you do something quickly and you can sprint, you might completely change the game and score and absolutely level the playing field. Or in wrestling, where you might hit a takedown that means that you win. I think that's kind of the disconnect sometimes, is that people don't appreciate. They haven't done the needs analysis. They haven't looked at the sport and gone, what does it actually look like? There's a lot of pinning people to the floor with slow isometric holds and holding them in place. There's not a lot of jumping, sprinting, and change of direction. Now, we'll still include them in the program because they're good human movements and they will be useful to you and they'll potentially improve your central nervous system so that you can move slightly quicker if you need to. But it's not going to be like the difference between if you took a rugby player or an American football player and put them on a powerlifting program, you could harm them because they'll get slow. They'll not be as good at sprinting as they potentially would have been. Whereas if you include sprinting in their program, they'll be very good. If you get a jiu-jitsu guy sprinting, it won't make a blind bit of difference because it just doesn't carry over to their sport because it's not what we do. And I think yeah, sometimes there's a bit of confusion around that they're like, this will make you athletic. And you're like, yeah, but athletic for what? Because athletic for um, jiu-jitsu is quite specific. Sorry, I'm going to go on another tangent. We're going to
Oh,
talk about
perfect.
VO2 max, if that's all right, because
Yeah.
that's the other one that people who are very well intentioned start banging on about. So they go, you need to buy my conditioning program because jiu-jitsu doesn't improve your VO2 max. Right, VO2 max is a potential indicator of health. It's not the be all and end all. You don't go into a doctor's office and they go, right, let's do your VO2 max test because we need to know how good your heart is. It's just a tool to explain something. And it's not, it's very heavily biased in terms of we got VO2 max from endurance sports. So it's a very good key performance indicator for endurance sports. It's a shitty indicator for grappling sports because our sport is acyclical. I have to thank Will Wayland for this one because I didn't understand it until he explained it to me. But essentially, endurance sports are cyclical, like one arm and one foot in front of the other, just keep plodding. Maybe on a bike, you just go round and round and round and round. And it has a cycle that you follow. Whereas jiu-jitsu, it doesn't. You might move forward for a takedown. You might have to back off. You might have to sprawl. You might use both arms on one side. You might use all of your limbs at the same time. Like you're not just moving like this in the way that you would be if you're doing a marathon where you just keep putting one foot in front of the other. So as a result, it means that the energy system sort of demands look and will produce different adaptations to if you were just putting one foot in front of another and not stopping. And so the VO2 max tests for where it's just a continual level of work. Whereas jiu-jitsu, if you put a heart rate monitor on, it goes up, down, up, down. Oh, here's easy. I've rested. I found a good position. It goes fucking mental as well because then we're stood up and we've got to try and take each other down again. And um, as a result, it means that people don't they look in on one little test and they go, oh my god, I've discovered something about the sport. And the problem that you have is if you look at Olympic level um, wrestlers, they've got shitty VO2 maxes. Like they're just a bit above average. And I mean like literally just a bit above average. No one would look at an elite level Olympic wrestler and go, God, they've got no gas tank, those guys. And yet for jiu-jitsu, we go, oh, no one's got a gas. Like, of course they've got a gas tank. It's just, it expresses itself differently. You're using the wrong test. Now, it doesn't mean don't do conditioning, but just don't listen to someone who tries to scaremonger you with a VO2 max. And they use this like one bit of research, and the research sucked. Like, they looked at guys running on a treadmill. I was like, I don't know if I'm sure you've seen jiu-jitsu guys run. They don't run well because we spend our time on soft padded mats, so our feet aren't very strong unless they happen to be a runner alongside it. So it means that they don't express it well. It would have been better if it was on a bike. Equally, it was a group of guys from like Norway, and they're like, the room was competitors and non-competitors. I'm like, I'm sorry, but have you been to Europe? Like mainland Europe's level of quality of competition is not the highest in the world. In the same way that a lot of guys from Europe will come and compete in the UK, we don't have the highest level of competition in the world. You need to go to Brazil or America if you want to see, you know, you've got deep brackets and lots of people with a lot of experience. It's not equivalent. So you've got guys in America talking about VO2 maxes based on a bit of research that was done at one gym in Norway. You're like, come on. You got to read more than the extract, dude. You got to look at who were these people, what was it talking about? The problem we also have is that the research around jiu-jitsu is quite limited. There's not loads of it because it's not a sport that's got a lot of money. And generally, the sports that have got money will pay for research to be done. And at the same time, those sports, the most of the research that comes out of it is Brazilian. So then you have to get it translated. And then most of it's about gi. It's only in recent years that we're starting to get a bit more no gi. People go, oh, this research showed this. And you're like, yeah, that was from the 90s in gi. It doesn't really equate you know, no gi and gi aren't even the same. Sub only and IBJJF aren't even the same. Like there's so many different ways that you can compete that it will change what we need to kind of prepare for the sport. Right, I'll stop there because I've
Uh, no,
I've like hit all the things I wanted to whinge about.
there's all kinds of great stuff in there. I mean, I'm glad you brought up VO2 max and I'm not an academic. I don't have the education that you do, but I came to the same conclusion, a lot of the same conclusions you did looking at that because there's charts. Anybody listening, go out there and Google VO2 max charts for athletes, and they'll have it represented for the different sports and where they fall under. And you'll see that wrestlers have terrible VO2 maxes when compared to any type of endurance athlete or soccer player or anything that incorporates more running. And you're 100% right. That doesn't mean that a wrestler doesn't have a phenomenal freaking gas tank to for output. Um, and even though wrestling and jiu-jitsu are different because there definitely seems to be more moments of explosiveness in
Yeah.
wrestling. I think no-gi jiu-jitsu and wrestling become very, very close in some of the
Mm.
demands. And so I think that, with the studies, are there any studies that kind of from for wrestling, right? Particularly probably more freestyle or folk, I would say, because Greco kind of is even a little bit more separated from no-gi jiu-jitsu, in my opinion, because of the rule set. But are there any studies that talk about that, or would you recommend that maybe strength and conditioning that folk or freestyle wrestlers take might be closer or a little bit more optimal for a jiu-jitsu athlete?
It's probably closer. So the way that I have had it explained to me and the way that I think of it is it all combat sports in particular sit on a spectrum in the same way that field sports sit on a spectrum. So you've got football at one end, or sorry, soccer at one end, and then you've got American football at the other end. And like soccer is highly aerobic. There are huge aerobic demands. You've got to run around for 90 minutes.
Mm.
Then you've got rugby union. So like the All Blacks, there's a huge aerobic demand there. Then you've got rugby league, where there's less of an aerobic demand because it's more like American football in that every time someone makes a tackle, you reset and you go back. It's not the same as American football where it's a total reset and everyone gets like time to recover. And the average play in American football is, I think, like 4 seconds in the NFL or something like that. I think it's a little bit longer in rugby league. And so you've got a spectrum of sports that are very, very anaerobic, or people will get angry at me for that one, have high explosive demands and long recovery times. And then you have sports that don't have as big explosive demands, but have very, very high aerobic demands because you can't just play and then sit around being lazy. You will have to move around the pitch for most of it. And it's the same for combat sports in terms of, I think they sit on a spectrum of chaos to kind of explosive demands. So jiu-jitsu is highly complicated, is highly complex and highly chaotic. So loads can happen and there's lots of different ways to win. Whereas wrestling is more explosive because that if you take them down well and then pin them, that leads to a win essentially. Or if you just take them down well, you can rack up points. So that's more explosive. And then from there, I'd say judo is even more explosive because if you can hit, especially in the current rule set that they've got for the Olympics, if the ground game is meaningless, essentially, it's can you hit ippon? So you are sort of fumbling and fighting for good grip positions, and then it's all explosion. And then you've got MMA, where it's more explosive again, but there's still high levels of isometric and kind of wrestling demands because you've got to use the cage, you've got to be able to get people down on the ground and keep them there. And then even further along, you've got sort of kickboxing and boxing where it's all explosive demands. And I would say as you go through them, they basically become, and it doesn't fit perfectly, but they become more constricted in terms of the sport. Like the rules are clearer about what you can and can't do. The simplest being like in jiu-jitsu, yes, you can't strike, but you can grab and grapple anything. In boxing, you're only allowed to punch with your hands. That's it. Next one along would be like Muay Thai. You can punch and kick, or kickboxing, but Muay Thai is cooler. Um, and knee and elbow and clinch. And then the next would be MMA, where you can do that and you can wrestle. And then it would kind of come back down the other way where you take the striking out, but you've got a bit more, like judo is probably more constricted than jiu-jitsu because there's so, like the win is very, very clear. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, the only clear win that we have is a sub. And the difficulty that you have there is that generally, aside from maybe legs, you need to have very good control and very good positioning on an opponent before you can apply a submission successfully. Whereas in judo, you need very good control because you need to have won the grip fight. But as soon as you've won that grip fight, you can go from, oh, I just put my hands in the right place to I have won. Whereas in jiu-jitsu, especially in no-gi, where the grips are really transient, that's a lot more rare. So it generally means that you need to get through a lot more layers of stuff before you can get to the thing that will actually win you the game. Whereas in boxing, there's not as many layers in the sport because you're just this sounds cruel because I'm not saying it's not skillful. It really fucking is. But the things you have to worry about are more limited than they would be if you were kickboxing or if you were doing jiu-jitsu because there's less of the rules control how much sport actually happens. So you just have to get very, very refined at that striking and counter striking and footwork and things like that in a way that in jiu-jitsu, footwork matters. But actually, if someone takes you, you can suck at takedowns and just get taken down. And as long as you're not an ADCC in the last half of the match, it doesn't matter. There are guys who've won or not won ADCC, guys who've won at high level ADCC matches, and they've just pulled guard in the first half. Um, so it just means that the things that matter are different to what they would be in other sports. So even though yes, wrestling is closer, it's still not the same. And even then, the what people are suggesting for wrestling is often not necessarily applicable for jiu-jitsu because you've got to bear in mind that most of the wrestling research is done on college level athletes. Well, those guys, assuming someone will let you in the room with them, but those guys are already they've conditioned their bodies since the age of 6. Like they are already at a level that's probably not appropriate for a jiu-jitsu guy unless they were born in Brazil. In terms of it's going to be too much too quickly. So we can learn things from it in terms of what we need to worry about and what we might want to push, but we don't need to copy exactly what they're doing because the constraints of their sport are still different to ours. Like they've usually got shorter rounds, for example, whereas jiu-jitsu, like it's usually between 5 and 10 minutes, unless you're doing no time limit sub only because you're Gordon Ryan. It just means that those things are helpful at pointing us to what we want to do, but not necessarily, we don't just want to go in and go, oh, the research says they should do this. And the other kind of interesting thing is that sometimes the research, unless that research is done by academics who are also working strength and conditioning coaches, it doesn't necessarily help us very much because if we're being unkind, there is an argument that actually strength and conditioning research is still catching up with what good strength and conditioning coaches in the Soviet Union and America figured out in the 60s and 70s. And we're still playing catch up. You know, you've got people discussing French contrast. Like French contrast isn't new. But in the literature, people are like, oh my God, it's this new amazing thing. Like, no, it's been used for decades. Like it isn't as easy as, oh, the literature says we should do this, because some of the literature is very good, some of it's crap, some of it's well written, some of it's written by people who've literally never coached a person in their entire lives. And I don't know about you, but I, as a teacher, didn't really put a lot of stock in research that was done by people who didn't actually do any teaching. Whereas if they've done both, it's amazing. It's really useful because you're like, oh, someone's actually trying to pick apart how the hell does this work, rather than someone's trying to write a study because they don't know how to train someone.
So what, with all of that, how would you recommend somebody? No, I know I'm loving this. There's just a lot to digest, and so you're going to have varied levels of interest and experience and all that. So if somebody listening is like kind of how Rob led off in the very beginning, if somebody's brand new to strength and conditioning, they do jiu-jitsu a couple times a week, they're a hobbyist,
Yeah.
and they just want to get a little bit stronger, a little bit fitter, be a little bit better on the mat. Um, how would you recommend they kind of start off as far as like maybe like some example? I know it's gonna be different per
Yeah.
person. They're
Yeah.
gonna have to customize, but a couple of examples of like rep ranges and stuff
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that. Yeah.
So I think you could go a lot worse than following Dan John. Um, it kind of concerns me that there's a lot of young strength coaches now who've not read any of Dan John's work. I think the rest of us are all standing on his shoulders to a certain extent because he was just phenomenal. The books that he wrote were brilliant, but he was very much a day-to-day coach. Like he coached regularly. He competed at a high level in Olympic weightlifting. Like he's phenomenal. But he argued that essentially every training session for a normal human, rather than say someone who's specifically trying to train in powerlifting or weightlifting or a different sport like that, wants to include a squat pattern, a push pattern, a pull pattern, a hinge, And he would usually say like loaded carries. I think you can also just include core and assistance work there. Generally, I would say I like to use a 2 day system where it kind of undulates a little. So I have a day that's slightly heavier and a day that's slightly lighter. But yeah, you want some kind of squash. You want some kind of squat, some kind of push, some kind of pull, and some kind of hinge. Um, and by that I mean like front squat, back squat. Generally, I'd say front and zerchers are going to be a bit more forgiving just because of the axial loading that you get on the back squat. So you're more likely to be derailed if you try and run back squats for long periods of time because you'll just get a sore low back. That's all. And we already get a lot of backloading in jiu-jitsu. It don't be fearful of it, but it just means that you'll probably benefit from learning how to front squat and how to zercher squat, and then also how to goblet squat, so that when your back doesn't want a back squat, you can swap it for those. Push, anything from push-ups all the way through to like bench press works really nicely. You can do overhead work as well. I think a lot of jiu-jitsu guys would benefit from really simple overhead work. I quite like something called a Z press, which is where you sit with your legs out on the floor. It's named after Zydrunas Savickas, who was like one of the best pressers in World's Strongest Man, who would literally sit on the floor and make the lift as hard as possible so that only his shoulders could do the work. And for a lot of grapplers, if they do that with the kettlebells and they're sat upright, it will force your shoulders to move through a good range of motion. Pulls, I like a lot of like dumbbell rows, pull-ups. I don't really like bent over rows. We'll use them and we'll swap them in. But again, that axial loading along the low back can just mean that people get sore low backs, and nothing will piss a grappler off more than a sore low back. So we'll use them, but sparingly. Whereas you can use the cable machine. You can do like a bench supported row where you kind of lean on the bench and you just pull and just learn how to squeeze that back. Same thing again. You want to make sure that the shoulder comes all the way down. You want a good stretch at the bottom of the row, and it'll keep your shoulders happy again. Hinges, I really like the Romanian deadlift. My biggest bugbear on that is don't look up. Don't look at yourself in the mirror. Keep your head and neck packed and look down and let it move with your body. Yeah, I've annoyed some people about that one. And then just kind of variations of core work. I quite like hanging knee raises because I think they work the hip flexors really nicely, and we use those a lot in our sport. So you can do worse than starting there. Nothing wrong with like ab wheels and stuff like that, but just make sure that you're keeping a good brace, like a good position to start from, because lots of people will arch their low back when they do those. I love the trap bar deadlift. I think it's phenomenal because there's a very low skill ceiling. Like, I think conventional deadlift is lovely and I will teach it, but I think some people basically jack off over it like it's the king of all lifts. Like, you're not competing in powerlifting, no one gives a shit. It doesn't matter what you do to lift. Like, which one can I load more? Trap bar deadlift. Cool, we're doing trap bar deadlifts then. And that allows you to put quite a lot of stress through the body quite quickly. I generally get people to do that as what's called an everyday max. So you just work up to like a heavy double or a heavy single that moves well. You don't need to like psych yourself up or put music on, or stole that from Mladen Jovanovic. And it just allows people to get a little bit of heavy work in, and then they'll do like 3 sets of 3 back off sets with 80% of that. And it kind of also teaches them to adjust the work depending on how fatigued they are. Like, some weeks you might hit a personal best, some weeks you might feel weak as a kitten, and that's fine. It doesn't matter as long as your body is experiencing the weight being lifted.
So
Go on.
I like that a lot. You said so you work up to a max for that day.
Yeah, for that day, yeah.
And
Yeah.
then you scale it back and you do 80% of what that is for
for 3 sets of 3. Yeah. And you can even do it as you could do an everyday max double. So you do a double that you don't have to psych yourself up for. You don't want it to grind, basically. You want it to be heavy and you think, fucking hell, that was work. But you don't want it to be you had to fight it up there. You know what I mean? Where it slows down and you look like you're going to shake, and you want to avoid that.
That's gold for people that don't lift all the time, though.
Yeah.
Because
definitely.
That's gonna work in, like, because like you said, you're gonna have good days, bad days, days are beat up, days you feel great, and that accounts for all that.
Yeah, lets you auto regulate. Same as RPE. So I would say that for all of your compound lifts, you want to be doing, I'll really upset Mike Boyle here. I would say that you want to be doing somewhere between 1 rep and 5 reps. So, like, I would have a day where generally you do 3 to 5 reps, and then I would have a day where you would generally do between 1 and 3 reps as your set. So, you've got a slightly lighter, heavy day and then a heavier, heavy day. When you're doing assistance work, so like rows and stuff, I'll generally say 4 sets of 10 because we want to build a big upper back. When we're doing pull ups and chin ups, I think 4 sets of 5. If you can get to that point, is plenty. Then just start adding weight. I don't think chasing lots and lots of reps is necessary on pull ups. I don't. I think it gives a point of diminishing returns, and people get quite sore, and generally your grip as well will be fried, and you don't want to. No one wants their grip fried when they're doing jiu-jitsu, so it's worth kind of staying away from that a little bit. But yeah, generally, rule of thumb is RPE 9 for sets of 10 on assistance work or like dumbbell rows, and then RPE 8 for sets of between 1 and 5 reps on the compound lifts, especially RDLs. Like a lot of people assign RDLs to like the assistance work graveyard, and actually you get a hell of a lot out of them by lifting heavy in them. And it's a better hinge than a deadlift, basically. And if you can RDL very well, when you come to learn the conventional deadlift, it's easy because you just RDL until you can't, and then you bend your legs. And it just makes teaching it much, much simpler and a lot less intimidating for people. Yeah, that's generally how I would approach it. And then I'd put some arms in, you know, finish with like 2 or 3 sets of 10 on biceps and triceps twice a week, and that'll make a huge difference for grapplers with their elbows. But yeah, the other things, just don't get caught up on what the weight is week to week. It's more, what's more important is the kind of monthly to 6 week trends. Like, is it improving? Great, then we'll keep doing it. But it doesn't need to be perfect every session. I think people assume it's going to be linear. And like, if you look at powerlifters, they'll say it's not linear. Well, we do a sport where some weeks you come in and you're absolutely trashed before you even touch the bar. So it's definitely not going to be a straightforward progression for you as a person if it's not straightforward for guys where their only sport is the bar.
No, that's that's awesome.
That makes sense. And it's kind of cool to hear like this perspective on it too, because pardon me, the like I said, my knowledge of lifting is very, very, very elementary. Basically, like have had to ask people like, what, give me a good plan, like what would work for me. I do just stuff like I like the overhead presses because now it makes me feel like my shoulders are not going to fall out constantly
Yeah.
from all the key locks and Kimuras I didn't tap to when I was a white belt. So no, that's really awesome to hear. And we're basically just about at our time, but I wanted to make sure and I wanted to ask, like you offer online training for
Yep.
people. Where can people go to get that from you? Because I think this is a very like solid program that people, if they are looking into starting a strength and conditioning program, like they need to take advantage of this. So where can people find you for this?
They can find me at getstrong.rollmore on Instagram. That's probably the easiest place to find all of it because it's like link in bio and all of that. If you DM me, I can reply on there. But equally, there's like an application for training, and you just fill that out. We book a call, talk through your circumstances, and figure out what will work for you. So like I've had a couple of people who've done the call, and worst case scenario, they went away with like a structure to follow in terms of their like jiu-jitsu training and like a very basic program. Whereas I've had loads of people who continue to work with me because they've signed up and gone, this is so much easier than trying to figure it out for myself. Like I take pride in the fact that it's worked for guys who've competed at a high level in the UK, and it's also worked for people who've literally never touched a barbell before. Like I've got a mix of young guys who want to compete and then older guys who just want to be able to do the sport that they love without feeling like everything hurts all the time. Like one of my clients, Ed, came to me because he picked up about 3 injuries on the trot and was thinking, am I going to have to stop doing this? And now he's like, he hasn't even considered whether he'd stop doing it or not because he just feels good all the time. So it's nice to be able to do that for people. And I think, like you said, so the problem I have with a lot of guys is I think they're kind of internet hardos, or they're guys who enjoy the gym themselves, so they don't get it when other people don't. Like I like the gym, but I do it so that I can make people's life miserable on the mats. Like I've never understood wanting to lift with no physical purpose for it because it came from rugby where I was like, I just want to bully people on the pitch. because it's fun. That's the thing I actually enjoy. I'll do this stuff so I can do more of that. And that's very much my approach. I don't want it to interfere with your mat training. Yes, we're going to get strong. Yes, we'll chase things when people want to chase stuff. We'll have times where we really push things like, and we'll have like, we have little competitions and stuff in the WhatsApp group between people. Like we did a pull up one before Christmas. But the key is when people come back to me and go, "Oh, I feel good on the mats," or my training partners keep complaining about me being strong, or they go, they don't mention technique. Or one of my guys, Steve, is an ultra heavyweight purple belt, and he competes. He didn't compete a lot last year, but he competes pretty regularly, and he's kind of beaten a who's who of blue and purple belts in the UK. And one of the things that always makes him sad is that people are like, "Oh, you're just so strong," and he's like, "Yeah, but what about my technique? Like, I actually play guard, and I'm an ultra heavyweight. Come on." But yeah, it's nice to, he'll compete against guys with sort of 120, 130 kilos plus, and they'll whinge about his strength. And I'm like, if you're 130 kilos and you're not stronger than a guy who's 110, you shouldn't be in that weight category. Like, what's going on? So it's nice to be able to do that for people, and it's nice to watch as people notice on the mats that it makes the difference. Because I think, like you said, it's very easy for people to fall into programs that are too much too soon. And it just makes you think like, oh, those other people are different. But they're not. They've just been doing it longer. It's the same as people who think they can't learn a language. Like, yeah, if you try and just dive in and start speaking it, of course. But if someone writes you a teaching program for getting better and better at it, then you'll slowly improve what you're doing and it'll get easier over time.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. And like I said, I appreciate you coming on a Sunday. Like weekends are sacred to a lot of people. But no, this has been a really awesome episode. I'd love to have you back on again, talk more about. I know
Cool.
Like
Thank you.
seeing Randy get like real excited about that. I know like it's like this is awesome. So like really
Cool.
do
Yeah, I'd love
appreciate you coming
to.
on. Cool. All right.
Thank you for
Well,
having me.
anytime. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been another episode of the Big Jiu Jitsu Show. I'm Rob,
I'm Randy.
and we'll catch you guys next time.